The network timestamps transactions by hashing them into an ongoing chain of hash-based proof of work, forming a record that cannot be changed without redoing the proof of work. Satoshi Nakamoto. Welcome back, Bitcoin enthusiasts, to another exciting episode of What is Your Bitcoin Story? I'm your host, Gigi, and today we have the pleasure of being joined by Carliño. Carliño is at the forefront of a groundbreaking movement in Guatemala, leading digitalwitness.io, a pioneering effort in post-election auditing. In 2013, he achieved the remarkable feat of verifying all election documents produced by the Guatemala's voting system during the national election. But here's the kicker. He did it using the power of Bitcoin and the Lightning Network. His work was propelled Guatemala into the history books as the first country to safeguard its voting system using Bitcoin, offering an unprecedented level of transparency and accountability. Through captivating documentaries, Carlinio has not only documented this historic moment, but has also joined forces with simpleproof.com to continue advocating for blockchain-based solutions. Carlinio firmly believes in the transformative potential of Bitcoin beyond just financial applications. He sees a new generation of Bitcoin enthusiasts emerging not only for financial gains, but for the enhancement of democracy itself. Today, we dive into his remarkable journey exploring how Bitcoin is shaping the future of democracy and beyond. Carlinio, welcome to the show.
Great to be here, Gigi. Gracias.
Hola, hola. So I guess it's exciting to have another guest from the Latin American, the first Guatemalan guest, and what a way to kick it off with your native country, having yourself on, doing some very big things. But before we go into all the remarkable work that you've done and are doing, as we do with all guests, we'll kick it off with the big question. So Carlinio, let's take it right back to the beginning. How did your Bitcoin journey begin?
Well, I had the opportunity to study in the United States. So I was born and raised in Guatemala, which, for those that don't know, is right next door to El Salvador. So you have U.S., Mexico, Guatemala, and then El Salvador and Honduras. And I had the opportunity, and my family has, not the first in my family to be able to study in the U.S. I did economics and entrepreneurship, and I graduated in 2009. Unfortunately, I did not cover any of the Austrian school in my college years. But when I returned to Guatemala after working around the region in Costa Rica and Belize, I did so to help my father with his business. My father is also an entrepreneur. He, at the time, he started many things, and one of the companies that I was working with and helping to grow was his roofing company. And so in 2012, our roofing company was added to the OFAC list, which, for those that don't know, it is the United States Department of Treasury Office of Foreign Asset Control specially designated narcotics kingpin and terrorist watch list. So this list is literally the worst of the worst blacklist. I remember at the time, I think Osama bin Laden and Kim Jong-un were on it. And basically 2 companies of our family business were put into this. And it was, we found out reading the newspaper. So we had absolutely no warning. Our businesses had been, employing and producing value in the Guatemalan, Honduran, and Salvadoran economies for 30 years at the time this happened. And when something like that happens, I reached out to friends from my college days who were working in the U.S. government to say, hey, this is happening to me. Obviously, off the bat, people change when they hear that you've been added to the OFAC list, because immediately everyone's like, well, you have the scarlet letter. Like, am I going to be, it's like, how do I really know this guy? Like, if I'm just on a podcast with him, will I get added to some list? you never know how things happen. But so basically, I was finally able to find an email, just like hello@ofac.gov or whatever, and we just sent out an email saying like, what do we do? We up until yesterday, this company was struggling. As an entrepreneur in Latin America, my father had gone through 2 bankruptcies. You, our banking people like very obviously could tell that we weren't drug kingpins with massive amounts of money. Like it's very clear that we are not laundering money, because otherwise we would have been able to pay the debts and not need to refinance, like all this stuff. And so it took them about 2 months to get back to us. So we get a response back asking for 15 years worth of audited financial statements. And we promptly, start to just do that, because we literally had money in the bank and we tried to cash our checks, and people were saying like they're not cashing the checks, right? And the banks are telling us, if we cash your checks, we lose our SWIFT license. And if the bank loses the SWIFT license, it goes, it is bankrupt. And if the bank is bankrupt overnight because of some OFAC problem, then the entire country's banking system goes into a bank run. And so that's basically how the U.S. weaponization of the dollar has been affecting people privately, and we were basically just collateral damage. And it took us 24 months to get off of the list. We finally got a letter saying you are no longer on the list. We remind you that we can add you on the list at any time. And that was basically what the letter said. And so it removed us from the list, but the stain, was still on us. Our competitors had, been telling everyone around the country that we're probably terrorists or drug kingpins, so you shouldn't do business with us. And so over the next following years, I basically was there with my father as we had to finally shut down the business after 35 years of employing hundreds of people and building really cool things. We were the one of the largest roof builders in the region. We built over, I think it was 3 million square meters of roof. Mainly industrial, warehouses, churches, big buildings. The largest roof in Central America, like the wingspan, we did. And anyway, so throughout that saga, essentially what I learned is the value of censorship-resistant money and how dangerous it is to give unelected bureaucrats the power to destroy people's entire lives and actually, generations worth of work, decades of reputation overnight by just, clicking the wrong button. The explanation that I got was there was a person in 2006 that ended up on our company registry in 2006. And then in 2012, that person was added to the list. And so anything that person was ever involved in was sucked into the black hole of the list.
Oh, wow.
And so, yeah, I mean, it is real. People's instinct to, when you hear someone was on the OFAC list, you get nervous is real. Like, that's what happened to us. We're basically standing too close to someone 6 years before, and eventually got removed. But at that point, what's the point? We have this scarlet letter, and so we ended up going out of business. And so it was kind of throughout the time that I was learning about Bitcoin a little bit. And I wish I'd been more conscious about it. I did help to start the blockchain meetups in Guatemala City. So
what year was that?
I had Guatemala. So a few years ago, it's hard to recall, but anyway, the Guatemala has a Austrian-inspired university called Francisco Marroquín. It is amongst the only, if not the only, Austrian economics school in Latin America. And I was doing a master's entrepreneurship program at this school around the time when the blockchain, not Bitcoin, was kind of a thing. And unfortunately, this school that is Austrian, inspired, was infected by this idea of blockchain, not Bitcoin. And so a lot of us kind of went into that, blockchain world. And, I was very passionate about it. But over time, I was kind of just frustrated that we'd been talking about this blockchain thing changing the world. And I'm still like, where are the real world
Where are the
use
results?
cases that actually fix things?
Yeah.
Exactly, right? And so so I tried to bring together as many people as I could in Guatemala City to talk about these things. And so what I did realize is that this really nerdy subject brings out very interesting people. So if you're alone in wherever you're living, wherever you're listening to this, and there isn't a meetup in your city, in your community, at least try to create it, because at least for me, it helped me meet people that I have now gone on adventures with to do really cool things with, that I didn't meet, in my neighborhood, in my church, in my school, in my university, in my job. Like it's an interesting way to find these nerds that usually have similar values as yourself. Obviously, most people that show up aren't trustworthy, and you should always don't trust verify anyone that shows up to a meetup, because they're probably spooks or just maladjusted individuals. But there are these jewels, right? Like you meet these other diamonds in the rough that you can collaborate with. And so had the fortunate experience of meeting a lot of people that I was able to work with. And throughout this whole process, our Guatemala is a democracy. The way our voting system works is we have elections every 4 years, and in 2011 was the first time I was old enough to participate, because you have to be over 18, etc. And it's this very organic system where the citizens themselves around your neighborhood are the ones that are in charge of protecting the votes. It's a very decentralized system. Guatemala has 9 million registered voters, and at this point, we distribute those in 25,000 tables. And so that means there's about 400 votes to a table, and citizen volunteers are the custodians of those 400 votes. And so in 2011, I became one of those citizens. Locally, they're known as the Citizen Army, because 25,000 tables between 3 and 5 citizens, it's over 100,000 people that are mobilized every 4 years. Out of 9 million voters and 18 million population, it's a significant portion of the population, and it is because only like 4 million people bothered to vote. This citizen army is about 3 to 5% of the entire voting population. And so I did that in 2011 and 2015, and just kind of realized that our voting system, and any voting system, is a consensus algorithm, right? And usually in Latin America or developing nations, the consensus algorithm is paper-based because we are underdeveloped. And so it's a proof of work consensus algorithm, because when you do paper and you force people to mark things on paper and then add up things on paper, you're literally doing work. And so it's proof of work. And I just began seeing a lot of parallels between Bitcoin and our voting system. And so it helped me through this saga that I was going through understand why Bitcoin is so valuable, because here is this thing that I'm looking at that mobilizes 100,000 citizens to protect the tables. Then the political parties send their witnesses to oversee what those citizens do. So that's another 100,000 people. And you're like, wow, we do this every 4 years. It's this complicated process. And yet Bitcoin does the entire network every 10 minutes. And that's when you realize, wow, like humanity cares so much about voting. And I really think there's this opportunity, right, to say, look, votes are like transactions. And every election result is kind of like a block. And so in that way, every country's voting system is a blockchain where every block has all the transactions. And so if we were to run a full node as validating nodes of the block, it would require us to audit the election, right? And so I just realized that this was a very unique system in the case of Guatemala, because the fact that citizens are responsible for carrying out all the process, that is what differentiates Guatemala. In most Latin American countries, and I don't know how it works in Europe and other places, but usually most systems that were similar to this, where you have lots of people mobilized, because you need so many people, usually they are state employees, right? And there was a famous quote from, I believe it's Stalin or Lenin, that says, it doesn't matter who votes, it matters who counts the votes. And so the fact that if you go to Colombia, I think it's like all of the public school teachers do this. In El Salvador, it's the political parties and their witnesses. But Guatemala is like literally your neighbor, right? And so we have this unique voting system that I just began to see some challenges and threats to, because essentially 2 family members in 2019 decided to run for Congress. They came with the philosophy that I think is, can happen to Bitcoiners before they become Bitcoiners, which is, I need to get involved in politics because only the bad people are involved, and so I will change it by getting myself involved. And so these family members decided to run for Congress, and they asked me for help. I said, look, I know how the voting system works, so I will audit it. I've wanted to audit it, already. It just they gave me the opportunity to do it on behalf of their political parties, and so I became a credentialed member of the voting system. Instead of being on the citizen side custodying the ballots, I then became on the antagonist side of the political parties that are there to keep the system in check and validate, right? And that's where I realized the citizens are like mining nodes and the political parties are the validating nodes, right? And so 2019 rolls around and I'm trying to verify this election, and I'm plugged into the back end of the website, and they're supposed to be showing 100,000 documents, and I'm looking at the website, goes from 0 to 10, down to 5, down up to 20, down to 10, up to 50, down to 20. You're like, this is very, very strange behavior. A database with JPEGs should just go from 0 to 100, not jump around. And for the first time in Guatemalan voting history, that website in 2019 crashed. And so it got all the way to 100 after jumping up and down, but then finally it went down to 0. And when you hit refresh, there was nothing there. I went to bed, woke up the next day, and there was 100 again. And you're like, oh, well, this is odd. And then I checked again later that day and down to 0. So they were doing this for 6 days throughout the election, 6 days after the election. And so for the first time in 35 years. So I'm looking at this and I'm like, for the first time in 30 plus years, the current Republic of Guatemala had its constitution in 1985. Our last revolution was 1982. And the main victory from the 1982 revolution was the voting system, was to recover the citizens' right to count our votes. Like 1982, our primary reason to revolt was we are sick of 30 years of manipulated elections by the army saying, magically this guy won. And so our voting system is the last victory that citizens had. And we had no problems from 1985 until 2019 when this happened. And so for the first time, you have people, the extreme candidate on the left, the extreme candidate on the right are arguing election fraud, but also candidate in the middle are also arguing election fraud. So I just realized this is going to crash the Democratic Republic, right? And when the authorities came up with their solution, they said, we're just going to count each one of the 100,000 documents one by one. And you're like, I ran the numbers. I was like, this is going to take 48 months. If they work 24/7, like this is not a real solution. So I called some friends and told them, look, we should build a CAPTCHA like game to do this. And pro bono, I also work at a foundation, which you can maybe show that that screen. But basically, I've been working pro bono for over 10 years to build educational content for kids. So you can see we have these textbooks that are used in 4th, 5th, and 6th grade. And then our secondary grades are 1st, 2nd, and 3rd basics, it's called. And so I realized we have access to this crowd or this audience of students that we could mobilize, right? And so basically built open source game to try to check this, but we failed in 2019. And so I was kind of frustrated and just decided, all right, you know what, I'm going to wait. And that's when in 2020, COVID hit. And so I had a lot of time to study and became a Bitcoin maximalist because I realized that, blockchain will change the world, but there is only really one blockchain that matters, and that is Bitcoin, right? And so essentially the main reason I failed in 2019 was that instead of being prepared for the election, I just reacted to it. But since in 2019 I built all the systems, then in 2023, when the elections happened last year, I had the system ready. And so I can basically, if you go to the next tab, Fiscal Digital is what the project is known in Spanish. In English, it's Digital Witness. And so this website is now at the end. So we finished our work. And so what we did is we turned auditing the election into a game. And so you can see our arcade where you can look at our top users. And so the top user was able to earn 383,000 sats. And the number 10, 112,000, and everywhere in between. And so how, the question your viewers should be asking is, well, but how, right? Because it's easy to say, but very hard to do. And so what this is, digital witness, or fiscal digital in Spanish, and fiscal is a word for prosecutor or witness. And basically what I realized is our voting system is no longer witnessing, is no longer prosecuting, is no longer validating the proof of work. And so what we need to digitize the auditing. And so in 2023, we actually get it together. So if you click on the next tab, this website is the national results website. It's called TREP, stands for Preliminary Election Results Transmission. And so you can click on the bottom left button that says Primera Elección. That'll take you to the June 2023 election results. So this is a government database that's published by the Guatemalan Election Authority. On the top, you can select between the election types. So we vote between president, Congress, and municipal. So we have 5 elections that you can choose. Right now, you are selecting you went to Lista Nacional, which is Congress. Yeah, so you can select any one of those, and it shows you on the bottom the map. So it says you're looking at the national totals, right? Well, there, what you did is you went to a district. But if you go down, so you can look at district totals, etc. But if you keep going down, it'll show you the vote totals of that district, right?
Wow.
But so it's thousands of votes. And remember, I mentioned that there's about 400 votes in every table. And so when you're looking at this and it's thousands, it's the addition of all the individual tables. And so to check for this, what you do is you go all the way up, and on the right-hand side, there is a text box that says Mesa. And so if you click that text box, you can input any number between 1 and 24,000 So click, enter whatever number. 21 is a fan favorite for sure. So now, instead of looking at the national or district totals, you're looking at that table. So if you keep scrolling down, it shows you the individual bar graphs and the totals that are supposedly being added up into the totals. But Bitcoiners don't trust; they verify. And cool database, bro. Like excellent, beautiful bar graphs. Very 1990s of you. But if you keep going down, you have the button that says ver. It's a blue button. You click that, and so to my great surprise and luck, after we did this work in 2019, the authorities had this opportunity for people to present ways to improve the voting process. And so in 2019, instead of just being frustrated, we participated in the official process. We submitted recommendations, and one of those was to create blockchain certifications of the JPEGs. So you'll recall what I saw in 2019 is these JPEGs, and we're literally looking at the table number 21 for District Congress example. These JPEGs were changing, right? They were literally disappearing and reappearing. And so in 2019, when I did this, we discovered the Open Timestamps protocol. And I suggest people go to opentimestamps.org. It's phenomenal. It's a beautiful Bitcoiner solution built by Peter Todd that is very easy for individuals to use. Like, it'll help you do this. And so if you ever, as a Bitcoiner, need to timestamp anything digital, you just go here and you scroll down and you toss whatever document file you want where it says stamp and verify. And what it does is it includes the SHA-256 hash of whatever file you've uploaded into a Merkle tree or a series of Merkle trees that eventually gets sent to Bitcoin via a transaction and the op return function. And so in 2019, I used this. When I finally downloaded all the data, I timestamped it to Bitcoin using this. And we suggested to the authorities in 2019 and 2020 that they consider doing this. And so if you go back to the previous tab, to my surprise, when I'm setting up to audit, I find this conspicuous orange button that says verificar hash, which in Spanish means verify hash. So cool database, bro. Here are the JPEGs that the authority is claiming correspond to those beautiful bar graphs. But then the other question is, well, how do you trust the JPEG files? Because if the JPEGs can change, they can make the bar graphs say whatever they want to say, and then make the JPEGs say whatever they want to say. But this year, what happened was this company, Simple Proof, proposed to the election authorities, hey, remember those blockchain certifications that were recommended by Digital Witness in 2019? Well, you could do this, and this protects the integrity of the information that you're publishing. So that as soon as the JPEGs reach the internet, what Simple Proof did, as you can see, the first line there says 26th of June, 2023, 9:43:25 a.m. GMT +3. So it's adjusting to your time zone. And then below it, you have the SHA-256, the block, and then after the timestamp of when the block was finally confirmed on Bitcoin. So what Simple Proof is saying is, we received this JPEG at this hour at 9:43 a.m. and then timestamp to Bitcoin and received the proof from Bitcoin 14 or 15 minutes afterwards, right? So they are publicly telling you, we had 15 minutes of managing this JPEG before it became publicly auditable by anyone using Bitcoin. And if you go down, you can click on ver on the left, which it says original document. You can click on ver there on the bottom left. It'll bring up the JPEG, so you can visually compare this one to the one that the other database is saying. So you have two different technology contractors publishing the same information, which means that in order to collude, you need to get both of those contractors. But you also don't necessarily, right? You don't necessarily need to only do click on the X. You don't necessarily only need to to confirm it visually, that's very difficult. On the bottom right, you have the OTS file. And so if you click on ver of the OTS file, it'll bring up this document that you can download all of this if you want. But when you click on that one, it'll show you the proof that the open timestamps protocol does. So all of this that you're looking at is extremely complex cryptography that is essentially just grabbing the SHA-256 of one JPEG and then hashing it to the SHA-256 of another JPEG to create a basically mother SHA-256 that then when a third JPEG is popped into the database, that SHA-256 is hashed on top of it. And so you start to create a Merkle tree, right? That's how Merkle trees are created. Yeah. But this is hard to visualize, right? So if you click back and you return to that, there's a button below it that says ver Merkle tree. And so I'm downloading everything. If you go all the way to the bottom, and so on election night, I'm downloading everything, and they're literally providing the proof where you can see there at the very top is what's called the Merkle root, and the hash on the very, very bottom is the SHA-256 of the JPEG that you just saw. And so what they're saying is, here is the visualization of how these SHAs are strung together into this Merkle root. And so you can just follow the cryptographic logic to reach the Merkle root. And if you click again on the Merkle root at the very top, the very, very top box, that's the Merkle root. If you copy the hash, you also see there's a field there that says TXID, so transaction ID, which you can copy and put into your own node. So anyone watching this, if you have your own node, you could just copy that transaction ID and verify this on your own node. But, since we are live, we're going to use the mempool.space node. And so it took you to the transaction. And if you scroll down, you can click on details and open up the op return function. Right below the visualization, there's a text box on the right that says details.
Oh, yeah.
On click that.
Got it.
And so now it opens the op return. If you do Control F and Control V, it'll just find the hash that you copied from the Merkle root. And so this is literally the process of how you verify that without needing to trust the authorities' database. They literally, all you need to do is download every single JPEG using a web crawler, which is possible. In my case, I was again a part of another friend was involved with the political party, so I had credentials, so I again had backdoor access. I didn't need to do the web crawler. I literally just had a button with my credentials that I could download all the JPEGs. I could also download a database where they were publishing all the SHAs, but then I could also go to my node and verify all of this. So if you go back to the previous tab, so that's simple proof and their backup, but then the one you had, the actual results
simple
database.
Proof.
So now what you can do with the TREP. Yeah. So if you go up, so now how do we verify those bar graphs? Well, we just need to download all of the JPEGs, and it turns into an OCR problem. And so OCRs are optical character recognition. That's a technology that has existed for many years. The most famous application of OCR is called CAPTCHA. For those that don't know, CAPTCHA was invented by a Guatemalan. He's the most famous tech entrepreneur of Guatemala. His name is Luis von An, and he sold CAPTCHA to Google, right? And so literally, anyone that's ever done a CAPTCHA or a reCAPTCHA, like you've been using a Guatemalan technology to help Google train its AI. And so I realized in order to save our democratic republic, all we need to do is learn how to use our own technology, right? And so that's what I built initially in 2019, but then in 2023 I partnered with Stackwork, who do a lot of things, and if you click on that one we can attempt this.
Sure.
But basically I opened up a website where people could log in, and they gave me their phone number, and so I sent them an SMS with this link. They would click on login, then they would click on existing user, and they would enter the secret that was sent to their SMS, which you have, and that would send them to a space where they could just do the work of using their eyeballs on their cell phone to help me look at all of the handwritten digits that are contained in all of the JPEGs and help me turn those into a digital database. So that allowed Digital Witness to have its own database based off of official documents. And that's the beautiful thing about the use of the simple proof blockchain certification that the authorities went with is anyone can do this and trust that the JPEGs that they're going to be using haven't been manipulated. It's the official documents that the authorities claim produce the results, but then it's just a matter of how do you read. The total database is 3.2 million of these. And so on your screen, what you're seeing is an example, right? So Unidos is a political party. And so we're asking our users to say, what do you see as the handwritten digit given by the citizens at the voting tables? In this case, it's 001. So people would just need to input 001, click done, and we'll see if the live demo collaborates. Yay!
There was some.
And see, we gamified it. You got +2. And so if you click the home button, it takes you back to the Digital Witness user interface through Stackwork. And what people can do then is just click on the top. Oh, I don't know why. You should have balance.
I've got it says completed one here. But there's no sats. I probably didn't input a wallet.
Yeah, but it's not showing a balance.
Or you maybe
no,
need to
input. No, you don't need to. So Stackwork basically, Stackwork just carries. Do start again. Try to do another one again. I think there's something going on with your VPN. But anyway, what we did is we gamified the experience. And so a lot of people were very interested in, particularly young people, because for whatever reason, this proof of work consensus algorithm out there in the real world called the voting system doesn't allow a 16-year-old, a 15-year-old, a 17-year-old to vote, right? Teenagers are bombarded by the propaganda of the election, but they aren't allowed to vote. And so our message is, hey, you can't vote. No worries, you can audit. And if you audit, you compete in this game. And so compete with your friends to see who can do more for democracy. And so...
and you get rewarded in sats.
Stop sharing the screen because it's
a big bonus.
Well, we never mentioned that.
Okay.
Our belief is people came for democracy, but if they were curious, then that's up to them to learn, right?
Nice.
And so a very interesting dynamic happened on social media where people were asking, what's a SAT? What does paste invoice mean? And so they just themselves found,
we've got the 4 sats.
All right. So, try to click the green arrow.
Get invoice.
And so Stackwork gives you a Sphinx option or just the paste invoice. And so just generate an invoice for 1, 2, 3, or 4 sats, and then input that text invoice into the paste invoice and click pay me. And so it basically meant that if you were curious, if you were someone that wanted to see how these points, work, then you could turn them into sats. And
Mm.
basically what that provided was a very strong incentive to learn about Bitcoin. And that's what I think Bitcoiners need to come up with, right? It's yeah,
True.
it's this is proof positive that elections and voting systems present an opportunity. And if you go back to Fiscal Digital or the Digital Witness website, so what you just saw is what we were able to get 1,700, so 1,700 people to log in and do this. And out of those 1,700, only 1,050 or so passed the quality assurance test, because one important thing is how do you make sure that the trolls don't come in and give you bullshit data. We have a lot of tests, and so out of the 1,700 people that joined, about 1,000 passed our test and were allowed to really work. And out of those 1,000, you're looking at the top scorers. So basically, what I think this means is in Guatemala, my promise to Guatemalans is I will come back for every election, and I will put this on a billboard to remind people how many sats you earned in 2023 by just auditing the election. And so I believe that this is an opportunity. Voting systems are an opportunity to turn our vote into the 10,000 Bitcoin per pizza moment, which we are, what is it, next week? We are celebrating Laszlo's 10,000 Bitcoin per pizza. And so I know this as a Bitcoiner, we celebrate this every year because we know about it, but now we get the normies to every 4 years realize, oh, wow, 4 years ago, there was this guy that just from auditing elections got 383,000 sats. And so because Guatemala has voting every 4 years, and that coincides with the halving cycle, I am going to come back in 2027 and do this, and in 2031, and in 2035, and in 2039, and in 2043. And so every single time I'm going to just remind people what Bitcoin was doing back in 2023. And that's how I believe we can turn democracy, and specifically the consensus algorithm that your democracy has, into a way to remind folks what Bitcoin was doing way back when, but then also give normies a different touch point to Bitcoin. Instead of just going at them with sound money, you go at them with truth, right?
Yeah.
It is thanks to Bitcoin that Guatemala was able to protect its voting system from election fraud accusations. And I firmly believe that had it not been for Bitcoin, the Guatemalan voting system would have collapsed in 2023. That's something that actually happened in the real world. So when my uncle or my neighbor says, oh, you're still on that Bitcoin thing, that make believe money, that scammy stuff on the internet, you're like, dude, did you just not pay any attention to what happened with the democracy? And the president knows about this, right? The congressmen, the judges, because this became a very big struggle in Guatemala. And we weren't the only ones that helped, but we played an important role. And so now people who care about democracy care about Bitcoin. That's why I believe a new generation of Bitcoiner can be born, and they'll come for democracy, but they'll stay for Bitcoin.
Amazing. Wow. Carlinio, this is, I think, one of the first podcast episodes where I did hardly any talking, and I just fully participated in going down the rabbit hole, or the Merkle tree in this case, checking this hash, checking that one. But this is truly inceptional stuff. And the best part about it is, which I find very important, is the gamifications. Instead of telling people, do it, it's the correct way, it's the only way. By gamifying it, especially for the younger generations which can't participate in it, it makes them feel that they're a part of the change that is happening. And I mean, electoral processes in general, before what I just saw now with my own eyeballs, they seemed like a very tedious and very kind of boring, process where who knows what happens. I always, was truly believe that most, if not 99% of countries still do their own manipulation in the back doors, and there's agreements on who's going to win, what happens, who takes the chair. But with this place and system, there's no deciding behind closed doors what happens. People decide.
So it's not perfect,
Okay.
and so a few definitely, I really appreciate you just letting me go on. I hope I didn't people enjoyed that monologue. I didn't mean to, but so there are legitimate criticism against if you go back to the simple proof thing, right? The simple proof website. There is, and if you go click back, there was that moment in time, right, where you're saying, hey, and these guys are telling you, we've had the JPEGs for 15 minutes, right? So people legitimately can say, well, but how do we trust that in those 15 minutes the documents weren't tampered, right? And that's very legitimate. My enemies in Guatemala say, oh, all that you are doing is whitewashing election fraud, because now basically they changed the JPEGs, but now they're standing behind their blockchain propaganda to claim that nothing bad happened, but all you did was legitimize the fraud that occurred in those 15 minutes. My response is, the beautiful thing about this is that it only benefits people that want truth. Let's pretend like this JPEG that you just saw was fake. Go back down to where the ver button is. Bring up the JPEG. If somehow someone managed to change this, and you zoom in on the right side, you can see all of those signatures. This document was signed by 3 volunteers, citizen volunteers, but then also below it, you see all of the political party witnesses. So there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 additional people that were there when all of this happened, and they should have a photograph of the original. So if their original is different and the one that the election authority tampered with the one that the election authority published was tampered with, then you now have proof that the tampering happened. And even if the website is nuked by the authority, right? If all of a sudden, when accusations start happening, this website disappears, it doesn't matter. I have a copy on my local server, and many other people do. And we also can check to Bitcoin. And so you actually can now make arguments about election fraud that are based on cryptography and mathematics, as opposed to political opinions and how many Twitter followers I have and I can get to like my post, right? So all you need to do is call these people and get them to show up and be witnesses, actually participate in the legal case against the election authorities. Maybe if you live in a regime where people are afraid to get shot or thrown into jail and disappeared, this won't solve it, right? But if you live in a country like Guatemala that pretends to be a democracy, that pretends to have rule of law, then you now have the tools that allow you to make cryptographic arguments based on reality. And so Bitcoin becomes an anchor of truth in a sea of lies. Other folks say, oh, why are you using Bitcoin this way? Like, Bitcoin should only be used for money. And to them, I say, look, study opentimestamps.org. This is the most minimalist use of the Bitcoin time chain that I know of. You're only using 1 transaction per block, and that transaction could contain proof of hundreds of thousands of documents. And so we are not causing blockchain bloat. Like, I have not found a single educated Bitcoiner, technical Bitcoiner, that is against open timestamps. And I think it's very difficult to find consensus amongst Bitcoiners on anything. And open timestamps is one of those things. But the beautiful thing is, Bitcoin is the most secure proof of work system on the planet. So if you did this on a proof of stake system, well, that's just not as secure. And so Bitcoin really is the only way to do this, where you are guaranteeing that none of these documents could ever change. You would have to reorg the Bitcoin blockchain to modify these documents. So it's just like,
never happen.
I mean, proof of stake blockchains. I mean, it just there, because it is the best, right? There is no second best at this. This is the best. Why would you go for anything that's less? And because we are not turning these JPEGs into NFTs, rather we're just, I as a citizen, as an auditor, I have a copy of 150,000 JPEGs, and I have a copy of 150,000 proofs that confirm those JPEGs. And so I am the one responsible for protecting my archives. But I can use those archives in court against the state if the state ever lies to me, right? So my message to Bitcoiners is, we have this opportunity to farm more Bitcoiners, to create a touch point that normies care about. Like I've been hearing the term, the meme, Bitcoin fixes this, for a long time now. And my message is, Bitcoin doesn't fix anything. Bitcoiners who learn how to use Bitcoin figure out creative solutions to fix this. And they take extraordinary risks to do so. And we need more of this. We need more Bitcoiners to step out of their shell and not just wait for the apocalypse to happen, but rather like use the tools that you have. We have these amazing things that have never existed before, and prove to your neighbor that Bitcoin fixes this, right? So, in terms of democracy, I won't tell you to believe in it. I have my own conflicting thoughts. We could do a whole podcast on that. But what I do think is democracies, pretend ones or real ones, because there are pretend democracies and there are real ones.
I would say most
they
are
have to perform at least the theater, right? But they have to perform the theater of the consensus algorithm. And so if you're a Bitcoiner living under a theater of democracy, well, just start finding out, how do I get access to the primary source data? And for years I had to get lawyers to help me to do FOIA, which is a Freedom of Information Act request. So I would go to the election authorities, I would submit a legal document saying, I want the JPEGs. Sign, give me the entire JPEGs of the entire election history of Guatemala dating back to 1985. Give me the blockchain. I want to download it and I want to run the node, right? I think I was the first one in history to do that in Guatemala. And I learned that I can only have access to documents as of 2015. Everything 2011 and further back. The election authorities had a tragic boating accident, and it's no longer there, right? So the other message is, if we continue to wait as Bitcoiners to go and get this data, it will disappear. And over time, history will just say whatever the winners want it to say. But if you start requesting this and timestamping it yourself to Bitcoin, you can have your own archive and you can constantly use it to either prove if you are living under democratic theater or democratic reality. And I firmly believe that if you do not measure something, there is no way to improve it, right? You have to measure it. And so your opinion about democracy being fake is bullshit. The only thing that matters is, can you prove it? And the tools that exist allow you to. If you go to your authority and say, give me the primary source data, I want my JPEGs from the tables, from the people themselves. If the answer is, you do not have a right to the primary source data, well, there's your answer right there. Yes, you live in theater if they don't give you the primary source data. But you might be surprised. I was surprised. I realized, holy shit, the theater in Guatemala wasn't oh, you don't get access to it. It's there is so much of it. We will bury you under a mountain of data that you will no one. It is impossible to get out of a mountain of data. And they didn't realize that the Lightning Network changes everything, because we can now coordinate with thousands of people online in a trust minimized way. And so they didn't expect it, and we did it, and it was great because the result was unexpected to everyone, and our work was able to protect the election results, so that when there is a surprise, if they carry out the theater and the theater turns out unexpectedly in a way that they don't want to, then if you did the work, then they can't change it. Sometimes the fact that there's theater will give you the opportunity to fire them, right? But you have to take away their possibility of changing reality to suit their whatever they want, right? And so anyway, yeah, I mean, the other thing is, why did I do this in the first place, or like
that was my question. What was
the
reasoning?
Well, so in 2019, when I saw the election fraud happen in front of my own eyes, and I'm talking to people and they're looking at me like I'm some tinfoil hat nut job that's a Trump supporter or whatever, and I'm just like, I can't believe you people, like you I saw it with my own eyes. I did talk to some close friends that told me, look, I believe you, but if your audit, if you end up publishing contradictory results, that is considered treason under the letter of the law. In Guatemala, our election authority is considered the Supreme Election Tribunal. So it is technically a autonomously, like supremely ranking member of the judicial system. So this isn't the legislative body, this isn't the executive, this is the justice system claiming what is true. They are the oracle. And so if you defy the oracle, legally that's treason, right? And so I realized, even if I use the Lightning Network or whatever other magical internet money solution to fix this, and I prove that fraud happened, I'm the one that's going to get thrown in jail, because very easily the state will be able to say, how did you get to that result? Oh, you tampered election documents. You are guilty of election tampering. That's why your documents aren't, your audit isn't real, because your primary source data is fake. It's fabricated to tell your narrative because you're an election denying whatever. And so I realized, if I'm going to go against the state and the state can just change reality, they change the JPEGs to say whatever they want, then why audit in the first place? Like, that's why Bitcoin being an anchor of truth in a sea of lies is real. Like, it's if you don't have that anchor to reality, then even if your truth is as legitimate as anyone else's truth, right?
Yeah.
And so if the oracle, the state, can change the primary source material that defines reality, then you can never have a way to independently say that's what is objectively real, and all I did was read your truth. And so once you take away the right of the state to change reality to suit its changing prerogative, because the state always has new reasons to lie to you. If we can remove that ability from the state, then we can establish a shared truth. And sure, they get to say what reality is. They publish their JPEGs. They publish whatever proof you're given. But once they publish, they cannot change their mind. I think that it's not perfect, but it eliminates the possibility of reality changing, and it gives us at least the option of choosing to fight for reality, right? And defend it from the slow creep of lies and nonsense, right? So in my case, it was literally, if I am ever in court being accused of election tampering because my results contradict theirs. How do I prove that I never tampered anything? And that's where open timestamps and Bitcoin would be my savior, right? It's mathematics and cryptography. Obviously, I took on the risk of us, I'm assuming that the judge will care about mathematics and cryptography, which if you're living in certain jurisdictions, that's not what judges care about. But again, it's theater and it's democracy. So if you're openly not caring about mathematics and cryptography on the topic of democracy and the transition of power and who the people elected to represent them, then it is officially theater. If you catch my drift, right? Like you expose the regime as officially being theater, as opposed to, I think it's, my opinion is that it's theater. It's no. It is theater, right? In our case in Guatemala, we called their bluff. They claim to be a legitimate democracy, and now we were able to force them to respect the democratic principles that they allege to protect, right? But if you don't force the state to do something, it's very hard. And of course, the other beautiful thing is they had in 2023 15 minutes to change the files, right? So they have this window of time. In 2019, they had 6 days. That 6 days is an eternity. 15 minutes to an hour is much less. So you effectively eliminate 99% of the attack surface on reality to the beginning, right? The state gets to say it, but if they're gonna change things, they're gonna have to take risks, and you're going to potentially be able to, prove that they made mistakes, that their reality is illegitimate, but you'll prove it, because if you force them to act super fast, then my experience is people are mediocre, right? People make mistakes when they are forced to act quickly. And so let's not let the perfect be the enemy of good. Perfect should not be the enemy of good. We don't need to fix the entire thing. We can just make it super hard for attackers to continue lying. It should be harder for liars than it is for people telling the truth. And Bitcoin gives us that power.
Amazing. I want to just add to one point, which I can't really connect this 15-minute window period. When you submit the transaction and it takes 15 minutes for it to get, so to say, we're talking about the confirmation on the block, right? For it to get added to the block. Once you submit the transaction, you can't change it. So I don't see the argument when they're saying, oh, you have 15 minutes. It's exactly. No, once I submitted the transaction, there's no redo transaction.
Well, but again, that's another data point. So we were able to get the data from, in 2023, it was 150,000 documents. In 2019, it was 120,000. In 2015, it was about 100,000. So in 2019, there's no data on this, but in 2023, now we can look at all 150,000 documents and look at, all right, what time did they claim that they got it? And what time did they actually get it on Bitcoin? And you can grab those 150,000, intervals of time and very quickly identify the ones that took longer than, say, 1 sigma or 2 sigmas, right? And so instead of looking at, it basically allows you to find needles in a haystack, right? Like, here's a mountain of data, but the challenge is finding the one that matters, right? Yeah. And this type of data is very, very quickly, you can say, oh, what matters is these places here, where for some strange reason, the timestamps, took longer. What happened? And so if there isn't a reasonable explanation, obviously if Bitcoin took 60 minutes to confirm a block for whatever random reason, Bitcoin, sometimes does that, because it does happen, right? But just like it could take 60 minutes, it could take 2 minutes, right? So But you can the more data you have on what constitutes reality amongst the digital realm, the more you can find and basically focus your energy on what matters, right? And so instead of thieves and liars being able to just hide in the crowd, you're able to shine a light very quickly on, oh, what's going on here. And if that's not logical, that doesn't make sense, then you immediately are able to identify the places where you can have more concerns. And so, yeah, that's
Amazing.
uh, I so I knew something very interesting was going to happen, so I created a documentary. It's called Immutable Democracy. It's available for free at film.simpleproof.com. It is a 15-minute documentary, so
We will
it's
link
very
in the
easy
show
for
notes.
folks to watch this. And so, as a result of me seeing this, I decided to help them by telling their story. And now I joined the Simple Proof team. I'm no longer just on digital witness, because it's not just about democracy. It's not just about voting systems, although they're extremely powerful. And because they're this very obviously public registry, it's an obvious place to start. But
Yeah.
I think this goes further. This is everything that the state ever decides to claim as real. We should be able to. And Simple Proof's
Verify it.
mission is we want to make sure that it's timestamped. I want to live in a world where everything that the state ever touches that has any relation to my life is timestamped to Bitcoin. So sure, the state gets to issue my ID, the state gets to issue my tax receipts, the state gets to issue my property deed on my house, things of that nature. But once they issue it, once the Oracle claims what is true, that is the last time that they ever get to change it. So that if you are ever in a position to get sued by the state, you should be able to at least know that the prosecutor on the other side can't just fabricate reality, right? They should.
Yeah.
You're always going to be at a disadvantage against the state, but let's at least make it mildly possible that individuals could beat the state in a court that cares about mathematics, of course. If you don't live in a place like that, maybe just consider other options. But if we have that ability where the state cannot fabricate reality, then that at least levels the playing field somewhat. And that's the kind of world I want to live in, right? A world where individuals can fear the state, because you should always fear the state, but don't need to fear that their records are meaningless, right?
And that you have no way to protect yourself if it comes to that.
Exactly. It does mean that citizens have a responsibility. It's your responsibility to download everything, to keep your records, right? Like if the state publishes anything, then make a copy. Don't trust the state, and don't just be a lazy citizen to say, oh, the state should not be changing the documents. Like, no, the state will if it wants to and has any opportunity to do so, if it benefits whoever turns out to be in the position to decide that, right? They're human beings. They will lie, cheat, and steal if they can get away with it. And so if we just eliminate that, then maybe we can live in a world where that's no longer on the table, right? Like they can do other things, of course. They're still more powerful than the individual, but they can't fabricate reality anymore. I think that is something that Bitcoin can't fix, because it's lending Bitcoin's immutability characteristics to everything digital. And so I'm very excited to just get the message out there and tell people, if all of this is based on open source principles, so you don't necessarily need to work with us. You can do it on your own. We'd love to see competitors out there doing the same. We definitely don't want to be the only ones. But if you don't want to take on the whole process, just reach out to us, simpleproof.com or digitalwitness.io.
Yeah, I was gonna say, essentially, how have you seen responses? Have people been and organizations reaching out since kind of this use case that you put out, and especially the documentary, especially in your region, the Latin American region? How has that been kind of taken in, or they're still not unsure?
Sure. So it's very, very new. It's very early days. Most people aren't clear as to what actually happened. It's people are around like chickens with their heads cut off, just dealing with the day to day. But the election authorities of Guatemala were accused of election fraud by the local justice department's election crimes unit. That's what you see in the documentary is the justice system trying to build that case. What they did was state on state violence. The justice system's election crimes unit attacked the election authority, but they violated the custody because they legally they can't do this. So by taking away all of the paper documentation, what they've done, and I don't know if they know that they realize that they did this, but they tampered all of the paper records. So because the election evidence has now been tampered by the election crimes unit, then the only thing that the judge or the court case can rely on is the Bitcoin blockchain and what is timestamped to Bitcoin. So the election authorities, even though they are amongst the highest judges in Guatemala, they actually fled the country and left Guatemala for 4 months. And they returned in February after the new administration finally took office. And so I'm saying this because it's a process that is still unfolding, and so the ramifications are still getting processed. And so the election authorities in February presented themselves in court. They posted bail, and the proceedings will begin. But knowing the Guatemalan justice system, it'll take years. And I believe that their only legitimate case, because the accusation is election tampering, the criminal case against them is they tampered with the election documents, and their proof is in the metadata of the JPEG files, which contradict the story. Like the metadata is unfortunately bad, and for those that don't know, metadata isn't as trustworthy. And had the election authorities not used Bitcoin, they would not be able to prove that the metadata was essentially the product of a mistake. What it means is the election crimes unit is arguing that documents were created outside of the time, but then when you compare to Bitcoin, you can prove that documents were created in that time interval. So the election crimes unit logic has to prove that there's a time machine out there and that time travelers attacked the election system of Guatemala because they were able to produce digital information in the future that exists on Bitcoin hours and hours before. And so that is fundamentally the logical argument that mathematics forces the election crimes unit to make, whereas the election authorities can say what happened was that the contractor that we hired misconfigured the time zones on the scanners, and so the scanners believed that they were in Africa in the future or in the Pacific Islands, and so that's why there's a discrepancy. But it's like, what argument is more reasonable? That there was a mistake with a misconfiguration of time zones, or that time travelers exist, right? And so if Bitcoin had not been used, then the election authorities could not prove this. And so they would have been found guilty of election tampering because the evidence is right there. Now, is this how the judge and the court is going to resolve this? I'm not 100% sure, but I believe so. We'll find out over the next few years. But so because the transition didn't happen until recently, it's only now that we can really claim that Bitcoin protected democracy, because the administration is now in power, right? And they have been since January, and the election authorities are back in Guatemala, and the court proceedings are happening, right? So it wasn't, the reception had been difficult in other countries that have had elections since then, because it was still ongoing. But now Mexico has elections in June. I believe Uruguay and Chile have elections in October, and then the United States has elections in November. And
The
of course,
biggest theater.
I know my part of the world, the Americas. I don't know what's going to happen. I mean, I don't know about elections in other parts of the world, but the idea of talking to folks like you is just say, look, I know that the Bitcoiners are a global decentralized movement, right?
Yeah.
So if you live in a place and you believe that it's theater, what I'm saying is, if you have time on your hands, if you're a Bitcoiner that doesn't really know what you can do to help the network, hey, why not try going to your election authorities and saying, I want the primary source data. Let me see the data. Timestamp it to Bitcoin and start verifying. Like, we can help you do that. Of course, you'll need to get resources, and then, I mean, there are risks, but I mean, why not? Like, we did it in Guatemala, we proved it, and we need more people to step up and do it, because if we're the only ones, then we're centralized, and centralization will not protect us. So we want to take this, everywhere that is possible. And the good thing is, we're not asking people to change their voting system. It's actually the opposite. All we are asking is to be digital witnesses, right? We want to be there and just timestamp everything and check everything. And so, yes, you can have your theater. Bitcoiners just are going to show up and watch and take very, very, detailed notes, and then publish what we learned. We published a 270-page report of our analysis of 2015, 2019, and 2023 elections, and we developed a series of KPIs that give a grade or a mark on the trustworthiness of the digital data that Guatemala has been producing. And so the other possibility is we could apply these KPIs to every voting system all over the planet and start creating a database of where is the theater more theatrical and where is democracy real, right? And so these KPIs are just like basically based on the data and our ability to trust it and verify it. And so if you live in a place where they don't give you access, then you get a 0, right? Like, if you don't have primary source data that can be audited and verified, then of course you don't live in a democracy, in my opinion. And it helps us call attention to this, right? So we are hopeful that Bitcoiners all over the world respond positively to this. I have been surprised by the response. And so just, let's fucking go.
It's amazing. You kind of, you answered the last question. I usually ask, kind of to round up the episodes, I ask guests, what is one piece of advice you'd give to someone who's looking to get, well, usually I say their first bag of sats, or kind of, dip their toes in the Bitcoin ecosystem. Usually people say that, do your own education, get some, try studying it out. But you kind of answered it yourself, where you said, kind of, instead of just, sitting on the sidelines, go and do something. If you have time on your hands, go and, verify the data of the electoral system, which I think is an amazing thing, because especially younger generations, they have a lot of time and they don't know what to do with it. And there's only so much TikTok scrolling you can do, right? Why not do something that could protect you and give so much feedback to your people?
I'm bored of scrolling, like this. It's nuanced, it's complicated, but it can be done. It's just like, talk to a lawyer friend of yours, submit requests for information. If they deny it, and I was denied many times, that just gives you the proof that it's like when someone's like, oh no, we're a democracy. It's like, here is the paperwork signed by the state proving that we are not, right? And so it's like, and don't fight me on Twitter. Like, it's like, here's the paperwork, man. It's like, but basically, it's,
you don't want the Twitter
I think
finger
all
army
Bitcoiners should study. I want all Bitcoiners to study. I want all people to study Bitcoin, right? Because like my message to Guatemalans is, oh, this was supposed to be impossible to do. You get buried under a mountain of data. It's like, well, we studied Bitcoin, and we proved that it's the impossible becomes possible if you study Bitcoin. Number one. So everyone should begin by studying Bitcoin. Then they should run a node, right? Learn that there's this beautiful thing that you can do that no one can stop you from doing, and you are verifying the entire monetary network. And that is inherently superior to fiat in all regards, and has never happened to humanity. And just realize the power you have in your hands. And so the next step for me is let's run full nodes on democracy everywhere. Because if we are able to basically take this running of a node philosophy, and there's tens of thousands of nodes all over the world, like if just a few hundred node runners in the world decide, hey, I'm going to go ask for the data, and I'm going to attempt to run a full node of my jurisdiction, whether it's a little part of, because you don't need to go for the national level. Take, for example, the United States. There are over 3,000 counties in the United States. So there are 3,000 different places where you could run a node in, right? So you don't need to go for the entire national thing. You could just do your own local neighborhood, your mayor, your sheriff, your whoever you elect to represent you locally. That gives you the opportunity to run a full node there. And it's not that hard, especially like small local elections. You should be able to just say, I just want the data. I don't care who wins. Like, I legitimately don't care who wins. I think it's until we get all countries to be on a Bitcoin standard, fiat does not, like, fiat makes it so that the leaders don't matter, right? But there is the theater happens, and so we can show up, download everything, and then run a full node. And when you publish this, like, it's actually data that your neighbor does want to talk to. Like, maybe no one wants to talk to you about Bitcoin because you're that crazy, family member or friend that doesn't shut up about Bitcoin and can't talk about anything else. Well, all of a sudden, you'll also be the one that knows the most about this thing that they care about, right? They're like, oh, you should go and vote. You should participate. And you can tell them, well, actually, I do. I run a node, and I'm here to tell you that our democracy is fake because of A, B, C. Or you'll realize, wow, I actually live in a democracy. That's part of what I'm realizing is Guatemala has the opportunity to actually live in a place where the people's voice matters. And I'm not convinced it's going to get us very far, but at least there is the ability to think that the voice of the people can matter. And so if we just turn enough people into Bitcoiners, then we will have a Bitcoin president, right? You just need to have enough of the voters be Bitcoiners, and so it will happen, right? Because you've proven that the voice of the people does matter. But if you prove that it doesn't, then that's still an interesting, you could show that evidence to your neighbors, and at least it's like, just not knowing is what forces, what allows your neighbor to say, oh, you're just crazy tinfoil hat person, right?
Yeah.
Like, I'll disregard everything that you're saying. It's like, no, like, here's the data. You're going to argue against mathematics and cryptography. Like, who's the tinfoil hat person now, right? Like, it seems to me like you're the one that wants to believe in fairy tales if you deny mathematics.
Amazing. Carlinho, I think there's still a lot of things we can talk about and go down deeper into the rabbit holes. I'd like to save something for the future.
Sure.
We definitely, like with all guests,
Sure.
our Bitcoin stories never finish, right? They're ongoing stories, and I'm a strong believer that these are still the beginning of our stories. So as we move forward and as things progress, we'd love to have you back, discussing it, especially with the judicial situation that's happening now. I would love to hear whenever that finishes in a year, 2 years. Hopefully we'll have you back sooner by then, but definitely also with the next elections, it will be interesting to compare how those will be compared to what happened last year, and kind of history was made. There's no rolling back the time chain. It's stuck there forever, generations to know. I would like to give you big kudos to the amazing work that you're doing and preserving democracy in your own country of Guatemala, which was on the brink of extinction in 2019. And yeah, thank you so much for taking the time to come on the show, share this incredible story, share some actual real use cases where we did the share screen, and anybody listening to this podcast who was trying to figure out what's Carliño talking about with the Merkle trees and the hashes and the JPEGs, check out the YouTube episode and you'll see it all visualized. And I highly recommend it because it's amazing. As we always say, don't trust but verify. Seeing it with your own eyes and It's very straightforward stuff, and especially with the timestamps, if you can take one thing away, definitely use timestamps for things that you wanna embed on the Bitcoin blockchain forever. And yeah, I will link all of the websites in the show notes. I guess if people want to reach out to you directly, what's the best way, Carlinho? Is it Twitter, or where would we send people?
Sure. So Digital Witness is on Noster. So you can just look for Digital Witness on Noster. Simple Proof is also on Noster. Unfortunately, Bitcoin plus elections got us canceled off of Twitter very fast. And so the real discussion can happen on Noster. I'm also on Twitter. My personal Twitter page is Carlos Torriello. And just visit also the website, simpleproof.com and digitalwitness.io. Our contact information is there. I think we also have a TikTok and YouTube. And so it's like all of our stuff is out there. Feel free to find it, and, just, don't trust verify, get off the sidelines. Don't, forget your neighbor. Like, don't give up on your neighbor, and let's fucking go.
TikTok next block. Let's go.